Good morning, everybody. As Heather said, my name is Tashya Allen, and I'm from the NOAA's Coastal Services Center, and I am breaking that trend in the Big Ten. So, sorry about that. I guess it's SEC and sweet tea down there. So, but I wanted today to share with you guys a little bit about the adaptation planning process and some different tools and resources that are out there that can help you. So this was me a few years ago when I started delving into climate change. I was just a bit overwhelmed with really what to focus on and what information was out there. And at the time, it was still kind of early when NOAA was getting involved in this. And so it was just a lot of stuff. And then we were being asked as, atmospheres and oceans to be experts on this information. So I had to really get up to speed really quickly. So if you're anything like me, you might be feeling kind of like, where do I start? What information is really credible? What can really help me start to address some of these questions? So my goal today, and I think the goal of most everybody here that is presenting information, sharing resources, is to help you start addressing some of these questions. So I want this to be an interactive presentation, and I'm not going to use keypad polling because I just like to be different or difficult, who knows. But you guys are on the ground dealing with these issues on a daily basis, and so I want to hear from you. So how this is going to work is that I've got a few questions built in here, and so when you see this little gold guy, you'll know that it's your turn to participate. And so I'll ask a question, and you guys are in your group, so this works nicely. We don't have to do any reorganization. But just talk with your neighbor about that question. Take a couple minutes to do that, and then I'm going to ask for feedback from you guys on what's your discussion, your ideas in that question. I'm not shy, so I will call on people or tables. I don't know names, so I will call on tables. So definitely volunteer and just let us start having a dialogue discussion about some of these issues. So the goal is to become more resilient to climate change and existing hazards. And so when you're thinking about doing your work towards adaptation, your goal is to really answer these two questions. What types of threats and impacts are climate change going to pose to me, and how is that going to impact my community? And what type of strategies and actions do I need to implement to help manage and reduce those risks? Although I'll be focusing on adaptation planning, mitigation is just as important. So it's definitely, you want to be able to do both. The goal is to become more resilient and be able to cope with these changes and these impacts. So doing both mitigation and adaptation are very important. And you can see from this example right here from Philadelphia, their adaptation planning process, they've actually identified mitigation activities, adaptation activities, and then they have this kind of realm, this overlap where there's activities that can actually help do both mitigation and adaptation. So for example, you have this green roofs example. So what that can do is help you reduce your energy usage and then also collect stormwater or rainwater, which can help with your stormwater issues. So the whole idea is to focus in on those different activities you can do to help you become more resilient to this changing kind of environment. So these are the steps in the adaptation planning process. If anybody's done any type of planning, they're probably very familiar with these types of steps. You have scoping and organizing your effort, assessing impacts, doing some planning, developing strategies, implementing and monitoring. And as you know, that this is a cyclic thing, is that you kind of get through a process, you collect more, you do some monitoring, you see how well you're doing, and then you need to reassess and rethink about some new strategies. So it's a kind of an ongoing cycle. What I'm going to do is just go into some more detail on each of these steps. So the first step is scoping and organizing your adaptation planning process. And this is really where you want to get into developing your objectives. Why are you really doing this? Looking at who's going to lead the effort. So many communities, such as Toronto, for example, they had their Department of Environmental operations lead the effort, but they wanted to ensure that there was representation from each of the different city operations or departments there to represent those different issues. And so you may have one group that leads the whole effort, the adaptation planning effort, but you definitely want to have that representation from those different sectors. You also want to think about your teams. So what kind of teams are you going to you need to have? And there's going to be all different kinds of stakeholders that you'd like to include in this. So you're going to have your city operations, you'll have businesses, you'll have nonprofits, you'll have your citizens, and you'll want to think about when and where you want those people to be involved and how you really want them to be involved. Another lesson learned from communities that have gone through adaptation planning is that for your staff that you would like to be involved, there needs to be a clear charge that they need to be involved in activities related to adaptation planning. They also need to have that clear mandate. They also need to have the time to be able to do it and the resources. So you want to make sure you want to do some sort of internal check to see, okay, do they have the resources? Do they know where that charge is coming from? Also, do they have the capabilities and the knowledge? There's a lot of possibly inreach that you might need to do, such as today's a great activity as we're learning about what some of the local and regional impacts are. We're learning about different resources that are out there. So that's another lessons learned, is that to kind of analyze where your staff currently is in their knowledge on hazards and climate change, and do some inreach and some information gathering and different trainings that are out there. You also want to communicate from day one. Communicate what you're doing. And you want to communicate with your staff, with your partners, and with the citizens that you want to be supportive and get the buy-in from. And so that, figuring out what your communication plan is going to be really, really helpful and really key throughout this whole planning process. This is an example of a community that we worked with, Miami-Dade. They're kind of, they were in the forefront of doing adaptation planning. They were kind of some early adopters. And what we worked with them is that they had a sustainability plan that they were developing, and they had an Office of Sustainability leading that effort, but they really knew that they needed to get the other city operations involved in this effort so that they could see the linkages between climate change and what those folks did on a daily basis. So what we did was we helped them do this collaborative process where they worked for 2 days, and they came together and they really talked about how climate change and existing hazards are going to be impacting these different city operations. They talked about where there were some commonalities in their issues, how maybe they wanted to move forward, those sorts of things. And it was a really good example of a collaborative effort to kind of kick off that sustainability planning. And there was a clear mandate from the mayor that he supported this effort. The department heads, they were all part of this process and they supported it. So the staff was seeing that there was this support and this charge moving forward. And this really helped them identify some common data needs, some common threads that are of impacts that they're having in the community. So it's a great example of a collaborative process. Okay, so now it's your guys' turn. So I'm interested in knowing, what is one reason why you're involved in climate change adaptation planning? So go ahead and talk to your neighbors and take a couple of minutes, and then we'll discuss what you guys say. So some resources that may help you in your scoping and organizing are, we actually have some sessions today. All of the sessions are related to adaptation planning and climate science, but one that I thought was especially relevant was the track D. We're talking about climate change communication, engagement, and action. So that'll be really helpful on talking to stakeholders, getting their involvement, when to talk to them, how to talk to them, that sort of thing. There's also a training that NOAA Coastal Services Center provides. It's a 2.5 to 3 day training where they go through the whole climate adaptation planning process, and it's very focused on cities and towns. There's also several publications out there that we also provide on stakeholder participation, how to engage stakeholders, how to talk with them, ideas on those sorts of things. Like here, you have these group activities. Also, the case study I talked about, the Miami-Dade example, when we worked at Miami-Dade, we wrote up a case study on that. You also had a great morning with that scientific information that is really going to help you look at some of the impacts and see what's happening. So you had a good morning of the regional and the local impacts, what the trends are showing, what some of the projections are showing, what some of those impacts could be. These are some additional resources. The U.S. Global Change Research Program has regional impact fact sheets, so that's nice. They'll have ones for like the Midwest and Northeast, so you can go there and kind of see what's going on. The Wiki Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts is, they actually have, even though they're focused in Wisconsin, they have done regional downscaling of climate information, and they had a recent webinar was talking about that. Also, the Nature Conservancy, I think Jeff showed this, the Climate Wizard, there's climate models on there. And then we also we work with a lot of communities to do risk and vulnerability assessment. So there's if you're starting to get into, and I'll talk a little bit more about the assessment piece, but what data and information you might need. So we have some different checklists that are out there. And also there's just a wealth of knowledge in the room. And so just, start up conversation to ask people questions. So the next step is the assess. This is where you're going to identify the threats and impacts of climate change and hazards. So looking at what's impacting your community. The first thing you want to do is identify the existing hazards. And I distinguish between climate change and existing hazards because a lot of folks are still dealing with those hazards such as flooding, snow, heat, those things like that, and those aren't going away, and we still need to manage those. It's just what's happening to those, and how are those things changing? How is climate changing? How is it going to impact some of those existing hazards that you're still having to deal with? And you can lots of times build upon how you're dealing with those to address some of these environmental changes. Another thing you want to do in here is look to what those projections are for your area. You know, some of the information is only available at the regional level. Don't get hung up on not having all the answers. Use best available, and if you do your planning process right, you can, as new information comes in, you can insert that into your planning process and look at those, see how things are changing, and incorporate that into your decision making. You want to look at how these, how flooding, how higher heat days are, 90-degree and plus days are impacting your community. You really want to look at what those impacts are on the people in your community, your built environment, so your buildings, your roads, your public utilities, and then also your natural resources. So how are hazards and climate change impacting those different sectors of your community? Then once you go through that assessment, you're going to come out with some priorities. You're not going to be able to do everything, so you're going to have to prioritize. So you're going to have to prioritize, are there some key hazards that we want to focus on, some key climate change effects? Are there some key vulnerabilities or those impacts that we're seeing from those environmental changes? So getting some sort of prioritized list to help inform the adaptation strategies that you're going to focus on in the future. This is an example of a community that we worked with. This is a little bit what we call a screening level risk and vulnerability assessment. It's that broader level. And what we did is we worked with Delaware County is in Pennsylvania on the Delaware River. And they have a lot of small towns, and they've been dealing with hazards for quite a while, flooding, different hazards like that. And they knew that they needed to start talking about these issues, but they really weren't sure how to get started. So what we did was we worked with their Sea Grant, and we hosted a workshop where it brought together all these small towns and cities, and we really helped them get that conversation started. And what they did in that 2 days was they really talked about, okay, what is it that we really like about our community and that we want to preserve or conserve? What is it that we really like about it? What are some of our issues that are going on? So they're near Philadelphia, so they're dealing with an airport expansion, they're dealing with some other things, some population shifts. So they started out talking like that. And then we said, okay, what are some hazards that are occurring? What types of things are you noticing? Are you noticing changes in some of these hazards? They were able to identify that. So this is an example of the format we use. So you can see that they have they have their land use map here. They have different hazards information that they were able to, and they use maps and photos and different information and their own knowledge, and they were able to start thinking about what some of the impacts were on the community. And this is just an example of them looking at vulnerable people. So some vulnerable characteristics are elderly population, poverty class, age, and looking at some of that and seeing, okay, what are the impacts of these hazards on those different populations? Then they could start thinking about what are some things they could start doing. And really for them, this was really just about initiating that conversation and looking at different information and getting folks together that have never been together before to talk about that. And I think that's a really key thing is that it's just how can you start initiating that conversation. This actually led to one of the communities writing a proposal to Sea Grant to do a deeper, more detailed assessment where they could look at their city operations and see specifically how transportation or how public services or how social services is being impacted at a more detailed kind of engineering level. Also in Toronto, they started out with that broader level assessment piece, looking at just what some of the impacts were, what some of the hazards they're experiencing, some of the climate changes that were projected. And that really helped them get the buy-in and communicate what some of the issues were, so that then they could say, hey, this is what's happening, these are things that we're noticing, and they started communicating that out to folks, and then they got the support they needed to go ahead and do that adaptation planning process and to be able to do their risk assessment. So they had that broader level, and then when they were writing their more detailed plan, they put in there that they needed to do a more detailed risk assessment on their city operations. Okay, so it's your guys' turn again. Identify one existing hazard, such as flooding, that could be exacerbated because of climate change. So that's your first, there's a two-part question. And then discuss what impacts that hazard could have on your community. So take a couple of minutes. All right. Here's some resources that are related to the assessing your threats and impacts step. Today's breakout sessions. Track C, I'll actually be doing an introduction to risk and vulnerability assessments, and then also track A, they're going to be talking about assessing habitat risks and vulnerabilities and some resources that can help you do that. There's also a training that the Coastal Services Center offers. It's we have it in a web format, so it's like 3 hours, it's interactive. We go over our approach to risk and vulnerability assessments and different resources you can use. There's also data and information. One thing that I don't, or one thing that's up here is that looking at your existing hazard mitigation plan. So I know you guys have a county hazard mitigation plan. I don't think you have a local one, but you might also have a floodplain management plan. There's a lot of good information in there. They've already gone through a risk assessment. So they're doing it for for FEMA's hazard mitigation grant program to get funding for disaster preparedness and planning, but that's a good starting point to get some of that risk and vulnerability information. Also, the combination of scientific information and that local stakeholder and knowledge. One of my colleagues at the Nature Conservancy, Adam Wetchell, does a lot of public engagement meetings, and he says, the science and the scientists and the planners and things like that all have a place in this, he says, but a lot of times the most compelling stories that he hears, or the things that people pay attention to, is the older gentleman that stands up and says, I helped build that bridge, the water wasn't that high, now I'm seeing the water that high. Some things are happening, some changes are happening. So these local observations, this local knowledge that people can contribute. You guys on a daily basis are dealing with these issues. You have a lot of knowledge and experiences to add to this process. And then also there was a mention of some of the climate science information that's out there. So there's the Great Lakes Integrated Sciences and Assessments. They're doing some local science and downscaling information. Mentioned Wiki earlier, and then also Molly from the Sea Grant. So there's a lot of, even if folks aren't in your state, they're still looking regionally and looking at the impacts. So there's definitely information out there that can help you. Okay, the next phase is the planning step, and this is really where you're going to identify your adaptation strategies and implementation options. And so this is really where you want to start looking at using that risk assessment, what came out of that risk and vulnerability assessment, and help that drive your adaptation strategies, what you choose to kind of focus on. And so some suggestions for thinking about adaptation strategies in this planning phase are to build on what you have. You guys have these different sectors or departments or operations, whatever you'll call them, that are already doing some things to manage your current hazards. So there's some things that you can build upon, some plans or policies or programs that you have in place, stormwater management, how you're dealing with CSOs, that you can kind of build upon to deal with some of these changes. For example, in Toronto, one of the first things they did was look at some of their existing programs that they had and said, okay, based upon these things that we have that are dealing with weather events that we're having, such as flooding and basement backflows and heat, high heat days and people getting sick from the heat, what from that whole list of stuff can help us reduce our vulnerability to climate change? So they did an assessment of these different programs, they looked at that, and so they identified those as some of the first things that they wanted to focus on, some of their adaptation strategies, to build upon those and say, okay, what else is it that we need to look at from here? And they've been really successful with their basement flooding protection program, and that's really where they help homeowners get this backflow system that doesn't let sewer water and storm water get into their basements and then flood their basements. You don't have that sewer backflow, and so it helps do that. They also had a plan that was helping them reduce flooding and impacts from or not reduce the flooding, but reducing the impacts from the flooding. So they just built upon some of these things. Also, Portland, Oregon, I mentioned them earlier. They were dealing a lot with flooding as well and combined sewer overflows. And so they were looking at what they could do to possibly reduce those. So they used their stormwater management plan and looked at how they could retrofit that and how they could start incorporating things such as green infrastructure into that to help their pipes and their sewer systems absorb some of that stormwater. Another place is looking at, I mentioned your hazard mitigation plans. They have, there's a list of hazard mitigation strategies in there, and that's a good starting place too. Some of them will be very response oriented, but they're probably in some communities they'll have some more planning oriented type activities you could do, so that's a good place to look at as well. There's also, part of that is FEMA has their community rating system, which is a program that if you participate in that and if you do projects that reduce your impact or exposure to flooding, it reduces your flood insurance premiums. So those are some examples of some things that you if you do participate in that you could start looking at to possibly reduce some of the impacts. This is an example from Toronto's adaptation planning process, that they also phased their approach. Instead of trying to accomplish everything at once, they looked at some of those existing programs, how could those be retrofitted, and then they looked at some sort of immediate things that they could do. So based upon their kind of initial vulnerability assessment, what are some things that we could do, some short-term actions that would kind of get us rolling, get us some successes so people can start seeing that, we can have successes, get more of that buy-in. And then they were able to focus in on a longer-term plan, write that strategy, and then that gave them the ability to kind of bought them some time, and they could focus in on some things that they knew would be longer-term, and also things that they knew that maybe might not be an immediate need, that things might, that they knew that they had time to deal with some of these things. And one of the things they wrote in was doing that more detailed vulnerability assessment, so they could really look at how climate change is impacting their operations, how it's impacting their transportation systems or their stormwater systems. Hold on that. Another thing is that in Toledo, City of Toledo is doing this. You guys are learning from each other. I know you guys went and visited the Milwaukee Sewerage District. And there's several communities out there that were kind of early adopters of doing adaptation planning, and I've got a list at the end. But those folks have a lot of lessons learned out there, plans, and that's what I've tried to do is pull some of that information out. And a lot of them are willing to share their process and what they're doing. So that's definitely places to go and kind of learn from people. Okay, so back to you guys. Just curious, identify one existing program or activity that can be used to lessen the impacts of climate change. So, again, some resources that are focused in on the planning step. We have 2 tracks today in our breakout sessions this afternoon. Track A, adaptation planning in the Western Lake Erie Basin. And then also Track C is we're going to be talking about climate change adaptation tools and resources. Case studies, Jeff showed the CAKE website. It's really well done, really good, easy to find case studies, and they're keeping it updated, and it's a really excellent resource. Also, Nature Conserving has a great resource. They focusing in on Great Lakes specific, where CAKE has the nation. These are very Great Lakes specific case studies, and they're keeping that updated. And then also we're growing the Great Lakes Coastal Resilience Planning Guide that Jeff presented on this morning. We'll be doing some breakout sessions this afternoon and trying to grow case studies in that so they can be very focused on some of those specific issues. And then training, OSU has a fabulous webinar series and all kinds of information, and so that's a great training resource to tap into. And actually the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District was just on and explaining their program, how they funded that sort of thing. Okay, and the last phase is implement and monitor. And this is really where you want to implement those you develop those adaptation strategies, you develop some, you prioritize those, so you really want to start implementing these, and then also get to the point where you're able to track that progress so you can evaluate the effectiveness. So I'm going to give some examples. Right here, you guys might recognize this one. This is the Toledo Zoo, their rain garden, and familiar with that, and as part of that Toledo-Lucas County Rain Garden Initiative. So that's a really good example of a pilot project. This one is from Philadelphia. This is their, what they did was they had, Philadelphia's got this big plan that their goal by 2015 is to have 51,000 acres of pervious surface. So more green infrastructure, permeable pavement. So this was a problem area in their city where it kept flooding, the sewer lines were damaged. So they're doing a lot of pilot projects to be able to test these concepts, show people that they're working. So what they did was they put in permeable pavement, and they were able to reduce, actually there hasn't been any flooding issues. And one of the cool things is when they were, during the opening ceremony of this, sometimes you clip ribbons or do the champagne or whatever. They actually threw water balloons on there, and you could see the water absorbing into the pavement. So it was really neat. There's a really cool video about this, and it's the Percy Street, and I can give you guys a link to that. So that's a good example of trying to reduce flooding. Looking at some permeable pavement type solutions to work with some of the other solutions. This is from, these are rain barrels, and this is from Milwaukee Sewerage District. And this is great because it's providing training skills to a youth group that's in Milwaukee, and also so job skills. Also, Milwaukee buys these barrels relatively cheap, and so they're able to, this youth group puts the barrels together, so learning job skills, they're getting paid for that. And then they're able to sell these rain barrels to community members for relatively cheap, $50, which is actually pretty cheap because I paid like over $100 for my rain barrel. So I'm like, $50, that's awesome. And they have a whole great program with their community to kind of teach them how to use this properly. What happens with when it rains and it goes into this stormwater system. So it's really getting people involved in this so they understand that water is coming down, what happens to it, what are the consequences of that. They also have a downspout disconnection program as well. They've been really successful with this. So their downspouts were draining right into the sewer line. So they actually have a step-by-step with photos and the materials you need and how to do this. I know there are some places where you can't do this, I guess because of codes. But that's just one idea. And then also they've been really successful with their program. This is all still Milwaukee. Their conservation program, and so what they've been able to do is called Green Seams. There's an excellent video on their website. They've been able to purchase land that is, most of it's usually agricultural land that has soils that are still really good, like for draining water. And so what they've done is they've been working with the Conservation Fund who manages this program, and they've been purchasing land that can help with deal with some of the flooding issues, and that they can also use for recreational purposes. So they'll purchase that land from the owner at a fair price, and then what they'll do is they'll give that land over to whatever municipality that falls into. So that's a really great, and that land can never be developed. So it's got a conservation easement on it. So there's some examples of some adaptation strategies that people have actually implemented. Then there's also Ann Arbor, Michigan has actually, in 2006, they did what is called a stormwater utility. So they put a fee in based upon, they charge homeowners based upon the amount of impervious surface that they have on their property. And so if you have more, then you pay more. But there's a way for you to reduce your fee by you can reduce your amount of your impervious surface. And then they have a program, the money that they actually get helps pay for the operation, maintenance, and running of the stormwater system. And then they actually have an incentives program that they'll actually help you, implement some of those greener kind of solutions. These are, I mentioned the backflow in Philadelphia. This is just kind of an example of how it works, keeping sewer water out of your basement during high rain events. Chicago has done some green roofs as well. And then these are just green streets, again, trying to, the runoff from the rain events, trying to absorb these and help with the combined sewer overflow issues. So those are just some quick examples of what people are doing around in the Great Lakes and some other states as well that have been successful. This is an example of, I think I'm going to say this right, Kinnickinnick, is that right? So traditionally, this area had some flooding issues. It's a channel, and this is the before here. It's a concrete lined channel, and that's how they used to deal with flooding. They in the channels, they basically lined them with concrete and hope that that would kind of help with some of the flooding issues. This area, because it was being portrayed as a safe area, development started coming in. Well, they've continually had flooding issues in the area, and the concrete's failing, and it's not doing its job. It's not protecting the homes from flooding. So what they've done is gone in, the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District. This is a pretty big plan, about a $350,000 project. I was just trying to show you kind of different scales of projects, but what they've done is gone in and relined the channel with gravel, and also did more native vegetation, so that it's helping reduce the flooding impacts. It's also more aesthetically pleasing. It's now recreational. It's also creating habitat as well. So they were just looking at some alternative ways to deal with some of the flooding issues. And then monitoring and measuring progress is part of this. So Milwaukee and Portland actually have monitoring programs, and the way they use their monitoring programs, at least Portland, was to actually, they did a lot of pilot projects, so they could test these concepts out and then monitor them to see if they're actually reducing impacts, and see what things would cause, to be able to help educate people on how these different types of techniques can be used. So one example is that they've got, it's part of their stormwater management plan, but they've been monitoring their green streets, and they've been doing this since about 2006. And actually the monitoring program, the data they got from that helped support that these green streets are actually helping them, and some of the other best management practices related to green infrastructure are helping them lessen their combined sewer overflows. So now actually green streets and other green infrastructure and other best management practices are actually preferred when developers go in and do something, or if they have to redo a project. So it's kind of great how they were able to use these pilot projects to educate people and to also get buy-in and support. And then they actually had actual data that supported how these different techniques are working. So that's just an example of that phase. Okay, so we're probably not going to have time to do this question because I want to give Patekka and Alyssa time. So hopefully folks will be okay with that. But just quickly, here's some list of, and I'm going to have Katie put these on the collaboratory. She's been, all these links that I have in here so folks can reference that. But these are just some of the examples I talked about, communities that are actually doing adaptation planning and have implemented strategies. So these folks are here. And also, I didn't want to steal Patekka's thunder, but Patekka's going to come up and talk about what Toledo's been doing to address greenhouse gases and also climate change adaptation. So Patekka, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in the city of Toledo. We are just beginning the process of planning. We've been working with Melissa and the Sustainability Commission to talk about sustainability planning, so that's part of what we're doing. But we've done a series of different projects and programs, so I'm just going to highlight a few. I don't have all of them, so if there's anybody in here, please don't be upset that I didn't highlight your project. Back in 2007, with the University of Toledo, we hosted a site of the National Conversation on Climate Action. We had a keynote speaker, Dr. Lonnie Thompson from Ohio State University, talk about the climate change and all the study and research that Dr. Thompson has done. We had a number of local speakers that talked about different projects that were going on in the county and the city, which I'll talk about here in a minute. And we had about 80 people. And when I was doing the research on this slide, I found an article that was written in one of the local papers that the title is City of Toledo Wasting Their Time Talking About Climate. At Environmental Services, we have an air resource section. And one of the things, new things that they've been working on is permitting greenhouse gases in their air permits. So they have 2 permits that were recently written. We've had a gas cap testing program every summer for several years now. You can see the numbers up here that are, I'm sorry, I have to take this off. Let's try to make it see. I'll put it back for you, Melissa. Let's see. Did I lose it? Oh, I lost it. Okay. Yep. Okay. And the main purpose of the gas cap testing program is to educate the public. And then we have another program that I'll talk about too, but really we want to talk about what the citizen can do to help with our air quality. So you'll see in 2002, we had people that went out to local gas stations and local events, and they tested 624 gas caps at 21 sites. I'm happy to say I did pass. And you can see the numbers here of how much just that year with the gas caps that were faulty, this helped prevent how many pounds of air pollution. Another project that we have is the Bayview cogeneration plant. It's a methane gas facility. Before at our Hoffman Road landfill facility, the methane gas, we had a flare. So now we have about a 2-mile pipeline that goes from our landfill to our wastewater treatment plant. The capacity of this project is 10 megawatts of capacity. And we received a loan through the Ohio Water Development Authority, and this project has received 3 awards, and one was from US EPA for methane outreach program. Another project that was just touched on a little bit is the Better Buildings of Northwest Ohio. This is a joint partnership with the City of Toledo and the Port Authority. So the City of Toledo received funds through the US EPA, through the Department of Energy, and those funds were partnered with the Port and also, through the Port, and then we've provided funding to do several projects. One is with the University of Toledo, gathering data, energy data. So we have a lot of energy data on our city buildings. We've retrofitted several of our city buildings. One is our Division of Environmental Services. We made changes to our HVAC system and also to our lighting. So now we can see. Another project, this is a huge project, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but at our water treatment facility, we had a solar plant, or a solar panels that has been key to the water treatment plant. We've done a total of 43 buildings so far, and it's been a savings of $627,000. At each building, the annual energy percent savings per office building has been $627,000. And we are in a very small building. We have about 50 people in our office, and we were one of the highest energy users in the city, behind our water treatment plant and our water reclamation plant. You know, those 2 facilities have pumps, they have generators, they have large HVAC systems, and our small building, we thought we had the smallest footprint in the city, and it turns out we were one of the highest behind them. So the changes that we were able to make with our HVAC system were huge. This is a project I was just talking about at our water treatment facility, Collins Park Solar Field. You can see here at the top, this is a screenshot from a website that we have set up. And you can go on this website. The information is updated to like May 1st right now. And it'll give you a snapshot of how much energy we're saving, and the number of light bulbs that it's equivalent to. With our solar field, all the products were American made. We have a solar facility here, a group that makes solar panels. So we were able to utilize their resources. And the solar field is tied into our generator at our water treatment facility. So on nice sunny days, we're able to produce quite a bit of energy, and I'll show you here. You can see a little bit better. So as of May 1st, if you're using a 60 watt light bulb, we've generated energy about 11,751 light bulbs, 60 watt light bulbs. Our CO2 offset equals 37,000, a little over 37,000 trees. Our total energy generated has equaled about 1,478 tons of CO2, and gallons of gas saved is 166,000, a little over 166,000. So this is a really cool website, and you see here the kilowatt hours that's been generated to date. Our current solar generation, the screenshot that I had before, kind of showed some of the numbers. So that's the website we have there. We've done a number of green infrastructure projects. One of the first ones was on Reynolds Road. That was a linear project. The bioswales were in the right-of-way in front of commercial developments, and it spanned from the Ohio Turnpike down to Heather Downs Road, for those that are familiar with the area. And eventually we'd like to expand that area. We have another project, the Angola Road project, and that is a picture of it right here. That is in another mixed commercial residential area, and that is one of a street that ties into Reynolds Road, and we'd like to make that area called Greenhouse Row. There's a number of greenhouses that are in that area. So this kind of ties in with, you're driving down the street, you see the plants, and some people don't realize that it's stormwater, helping with water quality. But then that ties into the greenhouses that we have in the area. Another project that we did is the Maywood Avenue project. That was a residential project. It's a double block in size. We designed bioswales that went in the right-of-way property in front of the homeowner's property. There's a variety of different bioswales. Some people chose trees. Some wanted just to replace their turf. There are other people, like you can see here, where people put in flowers. Well, we put in the flowers, but you can see some of the flowers that were put in are not what we originally put in. So the homeowners were taking some ownership and put in some flowers that they enjoyed. One year I went around Easter time, and I saw several Easter lilies in the bioswales. One of the first demonstration projects that we had for the Rain Garden Initiative was this project right here. That's at our building at Environmental Services. We put in a large demonstration project, and our building is on a former brownfield site, and so we had a lot of interesting things we found when we were digging, a lot of brick, rocks, but we were able to work through that. And this area has grown. We started out with really small plugs. You can see it's grown here, and we've been able to harvest some of these plants to use at some of our other rain garden projects. So we've had people asking for plants, and they'll call us up and we'll say, sure, get a truck, get some volunteers, and we'll show you what you can pull out. So that's helped a lot of our projects. We have a second rain garden that we just put in through the Ohio EPA Lucas County SWIFT Fund. And I don't know if I told you this yet, Lynette, but the project was, it's completed now as of last week, I think, Regina. And that's in the front of our building, and that one's a little different. As I said, our building was on a brownfield site, and so last year we had to do some remediation, and so they had to go in and dig out the soil. So instead of replacing the soil and putting grass, we decided to make it into a rain garden. So it is actually lined with clay, and then we put some soil amendments on top of that. And so we had to be cautious of how we put the rain garden together. So we're excited to see this work so that Joel, who runs our Brownfield program, can encourage other people to do rain gardens at their brownfield sites, and we can show them that this works. Another project we have is green alleys. We've done several of them. I think we've done about 6 in the city, alleys in porous concrete, and that's been a very good and successful program. We have one right here that's in its final stages. That's another Lucas County SWIFT project. We have areas in the city that are unimproved, so they don't have curbs and gutters. So we were able to go in and make some soil amendments. This is a pilot project. We want to see how well it works out. Because it's so expensive to put in curbs and gutters, and the neighborhoods usually are not interested in paying the assessment fees to get those curbs and gutters. So we'd like to use this as an alternative using our stormwater utility dollars. So there's soil amendments that he did with this. This is a really small street, so he wanted to have areas that people could park. So they asked for their parking to remain. So, and then some people asked for flowers similar to what we have in Maywood. So this will be a really interesting project to watch. And then I did not want to leave out at least one green roof project, and this is at the University of Toledo. It's on their business school, and this is a really, really nice project. It's on the roof of their building. It's a large green roof, so people can go up there, kind of walk around. I think they have like a sitting area that people can go up there and I guess relax after they've had their difficult exams. And next we'll have Melissa from Lucas County Sustainability talk about what we're doing with our sustainability planning.
Hello everybody, my name is Melissa Greene, and I do sustainability work at the Lucas Soil and Water Conservation District. I kind of have a unique position there. I don't know of any other folks doing sustainability in the state through the Soil and Water Conservation District, so it's kind of exciting. It's kind of a new thing. And I'm also the chair of the Toledo Lucas County Sustainability Commission. The group is a regional group, and it is a partnership between business, government, and nonprofit organizations. It's been around since about 2008, and what we do is we promote sustainability initiatives in Toledo Lucas County. So we will do things like put on educational workshops, and also we help to facilitate collaboration for various folks in the community who are working on sustainability. Here is just a snapshot of some of the members on the Sustainability Commission. As you can see, it's a pretty diverse group of folks, which is great because we're pulling in a lot of different knowledge and skills and expertise to promote sustainability in the area. And real quickly, the thing I'm going to be talking about today is our Going Beyond Green initiative, which is the regional sustainability plan that we're currently in the process of creating. And these are just some organizations that are involved specifically in this project. So we've pulled in a lot of partners in the community for the Going Beyond Green initiative. So Greater Toledo Going Beyond Green, like I said, it is our sustainability planning initiative, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we're focusing on in the sustainability plan and sort of how we're approaching it. And I'm going to kind of use the framework that Tashya was using and talk about how we plan to address climate change within the planning process and then eventually within the plan implementation. So real quickly, just in terms of scope and organizing, we decided that the Sustainability Commission really wanted to, rev up the things that we were doing in the region. We really wanted to create a roadmap to start to do projects that would have a greater impact on sustainability in the region. So we decided that we wanted to partner with a firm to help facilitate the sustainability planning process. So we have partnered with Brendel Group out of Fort Collins, Colorado, the Center for Neighborhood Technology out of Chicago, Illinois, and the Collaborative locally. So those are our partners on the project. And we have established a Going Beyond Green Core Committee, which are partners who have helped make this project possible. And also the Sustainability Commission, which informs the decision-making process that goes on with the Core Committee. So we've determined, who's going to be working on this project, who's going to be helping with it, and then we needed to determine what we wanted to focus on and what the priorities for the plan were. So if you look here, I don't know if you can see it or not, it's a little bit small, but we've established a framework for the plan based on the triple bottom line approach, which we take very seriously. So something that's unique about the sustainability plan we're creating is that we've really embraced the triple bottom line. So when you hear sustainability and when you hear going green, you think a lot about environmental projects and different things like that. But we really wanted to make sure we were addressing social systems issues and economic systems as well, which kind of gets to the heart of sustainability, that triple bottom line approach. So we've identified key areas in each different system that we want to focus on as we're developing strategies for the plan. So for natural systems, we are looking at water quality and supply, biodiversity and ecosystems, land and natural resource use, and then social systems, healthy, active, and safe communities, education, engagement, and empowerment, and social and cultural diversity and equity. And then the economic systems, we're focusing on neighborhood vitality, infrastructure investments, and economy and workforce development. So these were identified as the priority areas for this community by the Commission, and will also be informed by greater community input as the process progresses. So we determined, what the priorities for the sustainability plan are, and so then we go into assessing where we're at and identifying the assets in the community as well. So when we're looking at our baseline assessment, I just put an example up here. For example, land and natural resource use is identified as one of our priority areas, and what we're going to use to as an indicator to see how we're doing are acres of priority conservation land conserved. And then we've measured, what areas, or what our total acreage is for conservation areas in Lucas County. So that's kind of what we're doing with the baseline assessment. So what we will do in terms of climate change is we will look at the different indicators that can also help us measure progress in climate change adaptation, and we'll make sure that that's noted in the plan. Because also through the scope, what we have identified as how we want to address climate change is we want to, instead of making a specific climate change component separate in the plan, we feel like it's such an overarching issue that we want to integrate adaptation and mention of those issues throughout the plan. So that's kind of how we're approaching it. And in terms of the baseline assessment, same thing. We're going to identify which indicators would indicate progress in sustainability as well as progress in climate change adaptation. So then the planning process, and this is kind of where we're at right now. We, like I said, identified the focus areas. We've identified the indicators that we want to measure to see how we're making progress. Now we need to draft up the strategies. It's great to make goals, but we need to figure out how we're going to get there. So again, this is just an example of how we're looking at things. So land and natural resource use. We've got some draft strategies over there, different ways that we can help preserve land and natural resources. So we will set targets and goals for each indicator and then eventually develop the document. And again, this is in terms of climate change, we're going to look at these draft strategies and make sure that if there's any gaps in terms of climate change, that we revise those strategies to make sure we are also addressing climate change as well as our sustainability challenges. Implementation and monitoring. So even with a climate action plan or a sustainability plan, implementation is the most important part of any plan. You can write a document, but what you do with it is really the most important thing. So in terms of implementation and monitoring, we're not there yet. We're still in the planning process, but these are just some of the things that we will be doing as we begin implementation and figuring out how we want to monitor our progress. To make sure that the strategies we do come up with are making progress on sustainability and are making progress on climate change adaptation. We held a workshop actually yesterday for community stakeholders to provide input on the draft strategies we've come up with. We'll hold another workshop in September. And when our sustainability plan is complete, we'll have a monitoring platform online so that we can, again, track our progress on an annual basis to make sure that we're making progress. And we really are considering this a living document that will be revised every 5 years. So as more information comes out about our sustainability challenges as well as our climate change challenges, we can revise the document to make sure it's adequately helping us to achieve our climate change and sustainability goals. So I'm not going to dive too much into this because this is a lot about what the breakout session in terms of the climate change resiliency and the sustainability plan. That's a breakout session going on in Track A today. This is really what we're going to be doing. So I'll just briefly touch on how we hope to integrate the climate change adaptation into the plan. So a lot of times what folks will do is they will look at the challenges and then come up with the strategies that they could potentially use to address climate change. We're going to do it a little bit differently. We're going to take a look at the draft strategies we've come up with for our sustainability and also look at topics addressed in a lot of climate adaptation plans around the country. So again, I've listed some of those at the bottom. So what we'll do is we'll look for connections between our strategies and other strategies and issues that are often found in climate action plans and merge them together. And also identify where there are gaps and using what a lot of other communities have used to add on to our climate or add on to our sustainability strategies to make them more appropriate and more effective in climate change resiliency. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to really take a look at and delve into some of the draft strategies we've come up with for the sustainability plan, look at some topics often addressed in climate change action plans, and figure out and make sure that we get some of those strategies integrated into the plan based on the challenges we'll be facing here in Toledo-Lucas County in terms of climate change.